How you doing, everyone? And welcome to Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. And this is the MS-07H8 Gouf flight type. And this mobile suit is from Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2, and this is a new edition with a long time break of Gundam Sunday here on Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. So this is quite a controversial mobile suit in the game of Gundam Battle Operation 2 because it introduced, even though there had been other flight mode type mobile suits in the very high point areas of the game, the Gouf flight type and the Gouf flight test type were the two premier mid-point, mid-battle, very commonly seen mobile suits that could use flight mode. And at first it was considered a little overpowered, and I have to admit that I did resent some of the players that were using this very advanced mobile suit, but then it got slightly nerfed and I think balanced very well. And after it got nerfed, I became the random, for free, proud owner of a level 2 450 point Gouf flight type. And that's really cool because I really enjoy the mobile suit, and I will get into that later on. But the primary reason why it was so cool is because it has a very interesting history and lore, and it is a very handsome mobile suit. It is a fan favorite from Mobile Suit Gundam Side Story 8th MS Team, which is 0079. And this has a very tragic, sad history. It's one of those many Zeon mobile suits that were very cutting edge, very intelligently designed, filled a very good niche, but was plagued by production problems, circumstance, divided loyalties, divided production, and resource allocation, and just became a dead end. But had circumstances been different during the 1 year war, this mobile suit would have been a war winner. And it is a very nice looking mobile suit, as I said before, a fan favorite, and it is armed to the teeth, very deadly, and it's basically an upgraded version with tremendous capability of the very daunted, very valiant, and another huge fan favorite Gouf custom mobile suit, which I've covered before on the channel and is another star of the 8th MS Team series. Unfortunately, the flight type did not get the same infamy or notoriety, and that is because of circumstance. But let's jump right into the history of this mobile suit, and then towards the end we will get into why it is such a game changer in the game of Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2, especially with the introduction of water to the game, which I think is very exciting. It makes the gameplay even more fun. And for those of you who are saying, wait a minute, wouldn't water only benefit the amphibious Zeon mobile suits, I am here to tell you that the Gouf flight type does very well in the amphibious theater, especially above it, as you will see in these two ranked replays that I picked up in the last week and a half or so. But to get into the story of the Gouf flight test type, we first have to look at the Gouf. Now, there's two companies that were state-owned in the fascistic, futuristic, sci-fi faction known as the Principality of Zeon. Side 3 was the cluster of colonies farthest away from Earth, and they decided to have a very bloody war of independence from the democratic but quite authoritarian and autocratic rule of the Earth Federation. So the premier mobile suit at the start of the 1 year war in which Zeon dominated was the Zaku 2, and the Zaku 2 was already starting to show its age when fighting conventional forces in space and on Earth. And at the high point of Zeon's conquest, they almost totally obliterated the civilian Side 2. They forced the other colonial clusters of colonies to either capitulate or sue for neutrality defeated the Earth Federation conventional forces in space, and then invaded Earth to a stalemate, conquering roughly half of the planet. But at this point, the Zaku 2 was starting to show its age and was showing serious limitations, and of course the Zaku 1 by this time was completely outclassed. So the Federation developed its new experimental mobile suit, Gundam, which was mass-produced into the Gundam mass production type, the GEM, and of course had its cousin, the gun cannon, introducing Federation mobile suits into the war, and the Zaku 2 was totally overwhelmed. The Zeonic Company, the maker of the Zaku 2, decided it needed an upgraded Zaku 2 in the form of the Gouf. And the original Gouf prototype almost defeated the Gundam at the hands of Rambaral, but this is one of the premier aces of the Zeonic Space Forces. But him and the Gouf were defeated, and of course the Gouf was mass-produced in a limited quantity to see if this was a fluke, but no, the Gundam kept striking down these mobile suits. And at the same time, the other corporation that was state-owned working for Zeon was the Zimmond Company, who lost the contract to the Zaku 2 and was looking for revenge against the Zeonic Company and made the Dom. And the Dom was groundbreaking because it used lots of engines, lots of hovercraft thrusters for superior mobility, and also had very good conventional armor and could carry a lot of firepower. And it too gave the Gundam a hard time. All the while, both the Gouf and the Dom were giving the standard non-hero mobile suits of the Federation, like the GEM and the gun cannon, a very hard time indeed. But with Zeon more interested in the Dom than the Gouf, because quite frankly the Dom just had better mobility and better firepower. The Gouf was very good at hand-to-hand and had a higher thruster output, but the Dom was a game changer, and there were already several variants being produced. And on top of that, the Gouf was limited to Earth combat. It really never had a full-on version for space combat. There was the Ifrit, but that is a tale for another day, hint hint. But the Gouf was really at the end of its life, so the Zeonic Company, trying to save face, were starting to use the Gouf for aces, for custom ace units, or as experimental prototypes to try and take the Earth theater back from Zimmond and win back some sales, win back some production rights, and some prestige. So the Zeonic Company developed the Gouf flight test type, the MS-07H4, and its idea was to create an avionic version of the Gouf, a hand-to-hand combat brawling mobile suit that could fly in Earth's atmosphere. Meanwhile, the Zimmond Company developed the Dom into not just a terrestrial version, but a space version, and that space version became really the premier frontline Zeon unit in space. So the Zeonic Company really had to invest a lot of money and a lot of thought into the next big mobile suit to try and take the power away from Zimmond and give it back to Zeonic in this fascist regime. So the Gouf flight test type proved to be alright, and they made a limited production run of the Gouf flight type. And the Gouf flight type was basically a Gouf custom with a 75mm rotary Gatling cannon, which was just completely vicious, a backup weapon of a 3-barrel 75mm cannon, a heat sword, and just to boot, some Panzerfaust, which were disposable handheld rockets. This thing was just as capable as the best terrestrial ground version of the Gouf, but it could fly. This was really important because the Zeon were having serious trouble with air superiority on Earth. In space, they had the DOP space fighter and mobile suits, which weren't restricted by gravity and resistance from airflow, so their mobile suits were extremely fast and maneuverable in space, but not so on Earth. And their space fighter, the DOP, was not designed for aerospace combat. It did pretty poor compared to the purpose-built Federation conventional jet forces, and later on the core booster fighters, which were specially designed to work in Earth's atmosphere and space with equal effectiveness. And the DOP got its butt totally kicked, and because of this, the conventional forces in the Battle of Odessa of the Earth Federation used heavy artillery, small detachments of strategically used mobile suits, which were new to the Federation, but just super epic, huge formations of tanks, very large artillery, and overwhelming air power to just subdue and defeat the Zeon forces under Makuve at Odessa, and thus breaking Zeon's control of Europe and Eastern Asia. So a lot of these forces moved back to Southeast Asia, but unfortunately Southeast Asia was run by a bunch of Zeon scientists which were more concerned about personal glory than the war effort. So the Gouf flight type was assigned to the Obsolus, which was one of Zeon's many Hail Mary mass destructive super weapons, because this was basically a huge war-ending beam weapon, flying saucer, mobile armor death machine. And conventional Zeon forces could not keep up with it because it flew and it hovered. And the Zeon aerospace forces were either all but wiped out or were not considered effective enough to take on Federation air forces. So once the Gouf flight test type was completed, everyone was very hopeful, especially with the performance of some of the custom Gouf types where they had killed scores of mobile suits and gun tanks, that this might be a very promising weapon. So of course they relegated it to guarding the Obsolus, at least 2 units. It was a mobile suit strike team of 3, and the leader of the strike team faced off against Shiro Amada in his EZ-8 and was unfortunately defeated. But he took on the entire 8th MS team and almost won, even though, of course, the Zeon leaders did not know of the battle. They just know that this leader of this prototype team was killed in action, and thus was a bad mark for this mobile suit. His 2 wingmates would guard the Obsolus and were later used to guard the Kerguelen, which was an escaped ship that was going to bring the remnants of the retreating forces of Odessa and Southeast Asia into space so that they could flee the losing theaters of war on Earth for Zeon and rejoin the Zeon forces in space. But as fate would have it, these 2 units were destroyed when they were taken out with the Kerguelen in a cheap shot by a humble Jim sniper with a beam sniper rifle. And that is very unfortunate. These 2 mobile suits never got to show their promise or potential, but one could imagine that this was a serious weakness of Zeon, having ships, since they're living in space and invading the Earth, having ships go to Earth or leaving Earth for space. They'd be particularly vulnerable in the atmosphere and really had nothing to guard their ships during this transition. They could guard it with mobile suits in space, but mobile suits had to board ships or they'd burn up in the atmosphere to get onto Earth. So this would have been the perfect mobile suit to engage Federation fighter craft in the atmosphere and just take them out with a very vicious cannon, like imagine a minigun except it fired tank shells. And it just would have totally obliterated anything against it. And then once it got to the ground, this was a very fast-moving, very guerrilla tactic style mobile suit that could give frontline air support to Zeon forces, specifically DOMs or other fast-moving aquatic mobile suits that were creating a guerrilla war or raiding operations or sudden attacks on bases, and then could quickly retreat with fast-moving forces and not be left behind. It's a very, very interesting mobile suit concept that would have done very well. But unfortunately for Zeon, this mobile suit was a dead end. The Gouf was no longer necessary because the Zeon retreated fully from Earth and left a lot of remnants on Earth, and including 1 or 2 examples of this particular mobile suit, along with many others. But the Zeonic company considered this a total loss and then tried to design the Gouf to be the next superior mobile suit in space. Unfortunately for Zeon, they didn't have the ace pilots to pilot them. And on top of all that, there's no need for the Gouf anymore. And the Gouf flight type had a very poor showing due to circumstance, and it never got produced in the numbers to show its true capability, and it was designed for a theater of war that no longer existed. While Siemens Dom, they could just take all the atmospheric thrusters and engines and such out of the Dom and put in space thrusters, and then it was called the Rick Dom. And so you could reuse these mobile suits you got back from Earth and use them for fighting in space. But it's just a brilliant mobile suit. It's very cool looking. It's like an upgraded version of the Norris Packard Gouf Custom. And in game terms, I thought I would hate this mobile suit. But if you fly correctly, I've seen a lot of these mobile suits on my team get totally slaughtered and kind of tick me off, because there's a certain way you need to use this. This is like the Gouf Custom but for air. This is a raid that is used to surgically strike enemy support units or backpedal and kite general units and be a long-range raid, almost a mid to long-range raid. It has a tremendous ability with water, though, because it can fly above the very savage underwater melees and target enemies or even target shadows in the water with the Gatling cannon. Once you lock onto an enemy, you can lend your support without having to shoot through your friends or without getting involved into a melee that you don't want to. But this is a raid with the Gouf Customs triple sword attack, so it is very capable of doing a whole lot of damage with its melee attacks or on the counter, but it also has a very quick use rocket, and so for aquatic combat, this is a very effective mobile suit. And if you're dealing with an enemy team that has one support guarded by 3 or 4 generals, it's really hard for a non-stealth, very cheap, very infamous or hated mobile suit like the Ifrit or other stealth mobile suits to get in there and really take out that support and do the job of a raid mobile suit in the game of Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2. And this provides another way of doing it. You can go above the nonsense, hunt down the supports, and then go back and lend what little damage you can to do a 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 to take down some of those generals from a safe distance. But you can't just fly into the midst of the enemy with everyone shooting at you. You have to pretend you're a ground unit until the right time, and then you go up in the air when you have sort of a defensive line already out there. But you can be struck and hit from the air very easily now after this mobile suit was nerfed, and it also lost some hit points. So it definitely has flaws, and because it has flaws, before I got it, I was aware of these flaws and I played to the advantages of the mobile suits, and I didn't take it for granted. I didn't abuse it or exploit it. So I was very cautious in how I use it, and I think these two ranked A-level matches will show you just how effective this mobile suit can be, and I am very happy to have it in the collection, not just for the lore, but also obviously for a different take on gameplay. I'm not a huge fan of the melee raid or the stun lock tactic, and this provides a new avenue of playing the mid to range game that I really like, especially for a raid and especially for a Xeon mobile suit. So I'm a big fan of this mobile suit. That is the lore and history behind the MS-07H4, a beloved but little known about mobile suit that's also quite controversial in the game, but now that it's been nerfed, I think is quite balanced and a whole lot of fun to play if you don't push your luck too far. Well, that's it for me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.